Air smudge.
Growing up, I was taught that sin is when we miss the mark, when we fall short of God's expectations for us. We all do this, we all sin, but Jesus died to save us from these sins. As my faith has changed, this has become less and less of a useful concept. My deconstruction began as I thought about how Christians were perceived. I wanted a Christianity with better public relations. I remember Matthew Paul Turner had a podcast called Jesus Needs New PR, which promoted looking at Christianity through a more progressive lens. This, along with Relevant Magazine, and how Relevant Magazine had like this take on social justice issues from a Christian perspective. And that made me believe Christianity could actually make the world a better place for the marginalized. It was those kinds of Christians, the other kinds of Christians, that made Christianity look bad. I wanted to rehabilitate the image of Christianity. Then, COVID happened. It was around that time that I realized just how much more accepting and loving secular spaces are. They don't need to look up things in a book to determine whether they can affirm and love people. It's merely a thing that humans do. Reading Keith Giles' book, Sola Mysterium, I found his take very useful on love. He says that we all as humans have an innate understanding of what love is. It's like religion ruins this. I remember asking my friend Doug where Christianity went wrong, and he said, when we wrote it down. I think at some level, or I still at some level, identify with the Christian tradition, but my faith really centers on God being love and humans being created in that image of love, which means God's whole essence is love. He cannot be anything but love, whereas for us humans, as Thomas J. Ord says, we have the capacity for love, but we can choose whether to love or not. All I care about right now is whether things are actually loving or not. The command to love God and love others is one I take to mean love, and love others. Those who insist on an unchanging God and believe they should love God and love others seem to tend to love others on their own terms, seemingly, because their God also loves on his own terms. So, back to sin. The unchanging God has many weird things that he's done in the scriptures. Lots of killing, lots of weird commands. He has things he asks people to do that just really don't make sense. This is where we get a list of sins, which are really quite arbitrary. If God doesn't change and the whole book is inspired and inerrant, sins are arbitrary things a sort of obsessive-compulsive God doesn't like us doing. Some of those things involving hurting others when he says it's not okay to, but sometimes hurting others is okay because it's considered discipline. My thing is, my God, who is love, wants us to do what is loving. He's not hung up on various details on how we live our lives. So, I have been fixated on whether we are bringing harm or not, and have realized this really does differentiate me from the evangelical. When harm happens to someone, they will first question, is the harm really real? And really kind of grill the victim, saying like, you need to prove that the harm is real. So once it's actually proven that the harm is real, then they'll look at the abuser and tell them they need to get right with God and reiterate that we all screw up and need forgiveness, striving to restore the abuser. And it's kind of like, what's wrong with what they did? It's because God is angry. And it doesn't tend to address what's wrong is that you hurt someone. Now, to me, given the same situation, I would be looking at how something unloving happened to the victim, and I want to make sure they are taken care of. I want to make sure that the abuser is clear on what they did wrong and clear that it cannot happen again. And as for restoration, I think it should be up to the person who was violated what that looks like. Why? Because I do not want abusers to be able to continue to bring harm. This matters a lot. The problem is that the concept of sin does not allow abuse to be looked at differently from anything else that is forbidden in the Bible. The flat view of sin is what I theorize creates an evangelical church which is toxic, and that is unfortunate. It really does make it difficult for me to be in evangelical spaces because I know that quite likely there is abuse in their midst and they are doing nothing about it. And I think they're using their biblical beliefs to continue to not do anything about it and to talk them out of it. Like, I just don't have the theological structure to care. Like, I don't know. It's a challenge that I'm just not up for. And I'm not 100% sure that the Bible will fix it. I think that's where I'm at with it. And so I'm like, can we start listening to people outside the church? And they don't want to, and that's tough. When I hear evangelical worship music, I can't help but hear this. My God knows what's best, and by extension, I know what's best for all of those around me, which makes it hard, again, for victims to be heard. Honestly, I just wish people could have some humility. Have the humility to listen to those who see the toxicity. Have the humility to hear out those who've experienced the hurt and figure out whether the trajectory you are on is truly worth it. What kind of world are you creating? I, for one, want a better one. And it is my prayer that we find it together. Much love.